Hi, everyone. Welcome to another horror episode where we dive into three true creepy September night horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. As the nights grow longer, the shadows get darker, and the unknown becomes all too real. Get ready to be horror stories that may just keep you up tonight. Let's begin. Before starting these horror stories, please like this video, tell us in the comments which story you liked, and subscribe our YouTube channel for more horror stories. Story number 1. In the sleepy town of Crescent Valley, nestled in the heart of New England, September nights were usually calm and serene. The town, with its charming houses and tree-lined streets, seemed like a place where nothing could go wrong. But for Anna Miller and her friend Jake Carter, the upcoming October was set to reveal a darker side of their seemingly peaceful town. Anna, a young journalist, and Jake, an aspiring historian, had recently moved to Crescent Valley to escape the hectic pace of city life. They had rented an old two-story house on Elm Street, which, though charming, had seen better days. Its weathered exterior and creaky floors were part of its character, but it also harbored a history that Anna and Jake were keen to uncover. It all started with an old diary that Anna found while sorting through the attic. The leather-bound book was dusty and faded, its pages yellowed with age. Curious, she brought it downstairs and began to read. The diary belonged to a woman named Eleanor Hastings, who had lived in the house in the early 1900s. Eleanor's entries were filled with details about her life and the small, quiet town she lived in. However, as Anna read further, the entries took a dark turn. Eleanor wrote about a series of strange occurrences, eerie noises at night, objects moving on their own, and an oppressive sense of dread that seemed to suffocate her. The final entry was particularly chilling. "They're coming for me. I hear them scratching at my door. I must leave this place before it's too late." Anna shared the diary with Jake, and they decided to investigate. The town's archives and historical records revealed little about Eleanor's fate, only that she had disappeared mysteriously, leaving her house abandoned for many years. One crisp September evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened, Anna and Jake decided to spend the night in the house, hoping to experience for themselves the phenomena described in Eleanor's diary. The house was unusually cold, despite the warmth outside. As night fell, Anna and Jake set up their equipment, cameras, recorders, and thermal sensors, in various rooms. They planned to stay in the attic, where Eleanor had mentioned the most intense activity. As they settled in, the silence of the house was almost overwhelming. The wind outside howled, rattling the old windows. Hours passed and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Anna and Jake began to question whether they had made a mistake. Then, just past midnight, they heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the walls. Anna's heart raced and Jake's face paled. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to come from all around them. Jake examined the walls with a flashlight but found nothing unusual. "It must be the old house settling," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The scratching continued, growing louder and more erratic. It seemed to shift, as if whatever was making the noise was moving through the walls and floor. Then, from the corner of the room, a shadow seemed to form, dark and nebulous, creeping toward them. Anna grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to get out of here," she whispered urgently. They hurried down to the main floor, their flashlights flickering as they moved. The house seemed to come alive around them, with doors slamming shut and floorboards creaking under unseen weight. In a panic, they reached the front door, only to find it inexplicably locked. Anna tried the handle frantically while Jake fumbled with his phone, trying to call for help. The shadows seemed to close in, their movement becoming more pronounced as if they were circling their prey. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by soft, mournful whispers. Anna and Jake could barely make out the words, but they sounded like desperate pleas and anguished cries. Suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically. Anna's breath misted in the air, and she felt an icy chill wrap around her. A ghostly figure materialized before them. Eleanor Hastings, her eyes hollow and her expression one of sorrowful rage. The figure pointed toward the attic, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Help me," the voice pleaded. "Help me escape." Anna and Jake, driven by a mix of fear and empathy, decided to return to the attic. They fought their way through the house, the supernatural activity escalating as they went. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. When they reached the attic, they found the scratching sound coming from a hidden compartment in the wall. With trembling hands, Anna pried open the compartment and found a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of old letters and photographs detailing Eleanor's tragic story. Eleanor had been accused of witchcraft by the townsfolk after a series of unexplained events. She had been imprisoned in the attic by the very people she had once called neighbors. Her pleas for help had gone unanswered, and she had died in the confines of that small space. The moment Anna and Jake uncovered the truth, the supernatural activity ceased abruptly. The oppressive presence that had haunted the house vanished, leaving behind a sense of calm. The next morning, Anna and Jake contacted local authorities and historians, presenting their findings. The town acknowledged the dark chapter in its history, and steps were taken to commemorate Eleanor Hastings and her tragic fate. Anna and Jake decided to leave Crescent Valley, having experienced more than they had bargained for. As they drove away, the house on Elm Street stood silent and still, its secrets now known, but its shadows forever a part of its past. The town of Crescent Valley continued its quiet existence, but for Anna and Jake, the haunting of Elm Street was a stark reminder of how the past could reach out from beyond, demanding to be heard and understood. Story number 2. The crisp night air of September in Chicago was filled with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional echo of laughter from late-night revelers. But tonight, in the quiet corners of the city, a different kind of chill crept through the streets. Sarah Jacobs and her brother Tom had moved to Chicago only a few months ago. They had settled into an old apartment building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, a place rich with history and charm. As they approached the end of September, the excitement of their new city life was beginning to wane, replaced by a growing unease that neither could quite put into words. It started with the noises, creaks and groans from the apartment's old pipes, and the occasional thump from the empty floor above them. Sarah, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as typical of old buildings. Tom, however, had taken a keen interest in the building's history, especially after discovering its dark past. "Did you know this building was once a boarding house?" Tom asked one evening as they prepared dinner in their small, cluttered kitchen. Back in the 1920s, it had a pretty bad reputation, stories of disappearances and strange occurrences. Sarah rolled her eyes but smiled. "You and your ghost stories. It's probably just old rumors. Let's focus on the here and now." Despite her dismissal, the stories had planted a seed of unease in Sarah's mind. That seed grew into a full-blown sense of dread as September's nights grew colder and darker. One night, Sarah was jolted awake by a soft, persistent knocking. At first, she thought it was just Tom playing a prank, but when she turned to his bed, she saw that he was fast asleep. The knocking continued, rhythmic and insistent, coming from the door of their apartment. Heart racing, she tiptoed to the door and opened it, but there was no one there. "Just a prank or a bad dream," she muttered to herself, though her voice trembled. The following evening, Tom came to Sarah with a stack of old newspapers. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a headline from the 1920s. "Missing persons found dead in Lincoln Park." The article described the gruesome discovery of several bodies in the park, all of whom had been residents of their building. The cause of death was listed as unknown, but the article hinted at a series of unexplained disappearances tied to the boarding house. Sarah's skepticism wavered. So what? It's history. It doesn't mean anything now. Tom looked at her with a mixture of concern and determination. There's more. The last person who lived in our apartment before us vanished mysteriously. I think we should investigate. Despite her reservations, Sarah agreed. They decided to start with the park, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. Under the cover of darkness, they walked through Lincoln Park, their flashlights cutting narrow paths through the thick fog that had settled in. As they ventured deeper into the park, Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the usual nighttime sounds were eerily absent. Tom led the way to a secluded area where a large oak tree stood like a sentinel in the darkness. "This is where the article said they found the bodies," Tom whispered. Suddenly, Sarah froze. There was something unnatural about the scene, a chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She glanced around, noticing faint, almost imperceptible scratches on the tree trunk, as if something or someone had clawed at it in desperation. A gust of wind rustled the leaves, and Sarah thought she heard a faint whispering. Her breath quickened. "Let's go back," she said, grabbing Tom's arm. As they hurried back to their apartment, the air seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. Once they were inside, Sarah slammed the door shut and locked it, her hands trembling. The following night, the knocking returned, louder and more persistent. Sarah and Tom tried to ignore it, but sleep eluded them. The knocking turned into banging, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Walls, floors, the ceiling. Frustrated and frightened, Tom decided to confront whatever was causing the disturbance. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, he opened the door and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. Sarah hesitated, but followed him, her fear overshadowed by a desperate need for answers. The hallway was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. They walked to the end of the corridor where an old maintenance closet stood partially open. Tom peered inside and froze. There, amid the old cleaning supplies, was a small, dusty box. Inside the box were old, yellowed photographs and a leather-bound journal. Sarah picked up the journal, her hands shaking as she opened it. The entries were written in a shaky hand, describing the experiences of someone living in the boarding house during the 1920s. The final entry was a frantic scrawl. "They're coming for me. I can hear them scratching at the door. I must hide." As Sarah read, Tom's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. The temperature in the hallway dropped suddenly, and an oppressive silence settled over them. Without warning, the apartment's lights went out, plunging them into darkness. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stumbled toward the door. "Tom, we need to get out of here," she cried. But Tom was frozen, staring at something behind her. Sarah turned slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, emerging from the shadows, was a figure, pale, gaunt, and translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through her soul. The figure reached out, its hand coming closer to Tom. Sarah grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. They ran, the knocking now a deafening roar that seemed to chase them down the hallway. They burst into the street, gasping for air. The city lights seemed painfully bright after the darkness they had left behind. Behind them, the old apartment building loomed, its windows dark and empty. "What was that?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her eyes wide with fear. "But I'm done with this place." They decided to leave the apartment and the city altogether. As they packed their belongings, the knocking gradually faded, as if the spirits had grown tired of their torment. The apartment building remained empty for years, its history a whisper among the locals. Some say it was cursed, others that it was merely a relic of a troubled past. Sarah and Tom never spoke of that night again, but they knew that some places hold on to their secrets, and sometimes those secrets are best left undisturbed. As October dawned, the city of Chicago continued its life, oblivious to the horrors that had once lurked in the shadows. But for Sarah and Tom, the memory of that September night would forever remain a chilling reminder of the darkness that can dwell within the oldest and most unsuspecting places. Story number 3. The clock struck midnight, and the neon lights of New York City flickered as a chill wind swept through the empty streets of Lower Manhattan. Jack Turner, a 32-year-old journalist with a penchant for uncovering the city's dark secrets, had just finished his shift at the news office. The subway had already stopped running, leaving him with a long, eerie walk home. Jack cut through the alleyways, his footsteps echoing off the graffiti-laden walls. He was tired, his mind replaying the day's events. Yet something else gnawed at him, an unsettling feeling that began as he neared the dimly lit exit of the alley. He quickened his pace, but as he reached the street, he saw a shadow darting between the tall buildings. It was too quick to be a stray animal or another late-night wanderer. A sudden noise, a soft, guttural growl, made Jack freeze. His breath turned to mist in the chilly air. He peered into the darkness, his instincts on high alert. The sound had come from a nearby abandoned building, one that had been shuttered for years and was rumored to be haunted. Jack's curiosity overpowered his apprehension. He approached the building, its facade decrepit and covered in grime. The front door, barely hanging on its hinges, creaked open as he pushed against it. Inside, the building was a labyrinth of crumbling walls and shattered windows, the only light coming from the occasional flash of distant lightning. As Jack moved further in, the air grew colder, and the silence was punctuated by unsettling creaks and groans from the old structure. He pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating old newspapers scattered on the floor. The headlines were grim. Reports of disappearances, sightings of strange figures, and rumors of a midnight stalker who preyed on the city's unwary. Jack's flashlight fell upon a large, tattered poster on the wall. "Beware the midnight stalker. It comes for the lonely." His heart raced. The stories he'd dismissed as urban legends suddenly felt real. The growl from earlier echoed again, this time closer. Jack spun around, but the darkness offered no answers. He heard a low, rhythmic scraping sound, as if something, or someone, was dragging itself across the floor. He moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, each step amplified by the oppressive silence. Turning a corner, Jack stumbled upon a small room. In its center lay an old, stained mattress, and in the corner, barely visible, was a figure huddled under a filthy blanket. Jack's breath caught. He approached slowly, calling out, "Hello. Are you all right?" The blanket shifted, and a pale, gaunt face emerged. It was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror. She looked up at Jack with a mixture of relief and fear. "You need to leave, it's coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Jack could ask her what she meant, a low, rumbling growl filled the room. The air grew thick with a foul odor. Jack turned, his flashlight revealing a dark, distorted figure emerging from the shadows. Its limbs were elongated and twisted, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. It moved with an unnatural, jerky motion, its form shifting and pulsating as if it were made of shadows. Panic surged through Jack. He grabbed the woman's arm, pulling her toward the exit. The creature's growls turned into a guttural roar, and its monstrous form surged forward, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Jack and the woman raced down the corridor, the creature's claws scraping against the walls, leaving deep gouges in their wake. They reached the stairwell, but as they descended, Jack's flashlight flickered and died. The darkness was complete, and the only sound was the frantic thud of their footsteps and the creature's relentless pursuit. Jack stumbled, nearly losing his balance, but he forced himself to keep moving, driven by the woman's terrified cries and the beast's relentless growl. At the bottom of the stairs, they burst through a door and emerged into the night air. Jack glanced back, seeing the creature's shadowy form retreating, swallowed by the darkness of the building. He and the woman stumbled into the street, panting and covered in sweat. Jack looked at her, trying to calm his racing heart. "What was that thing?" he asked. The woman shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No one knows. It's said to be a spirit of vengeance, drawn to those who wander alone at night. It feeds on fear, and it never lets go once it's marked you." Jack glanced back at the abandoned building, now silent and still. The nightmare of the midnight stalker had etched itself into his memory. The creature had been real, and it had nearly claimed them both. He knew he'd never walk the streets of New York City alone at night again. As the city's lights flickered back to life, Jack took a deep breath. The horror of the night would stay with him, a dark reminder of the shadows that lurk just beyond the veil of the ordinary. Our 3 true creepy September night horror stories are over. Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more horror stories. Thanks for watching.